even before that time. So we've asked each one of them to come up and tell a story, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 minutes of a story about their experience personally here in Port Hueneme. And our first guest is Elizabeth Babchuk. Elizabeth is going to be talking about her parents. Who does not know who her parents are? Of course. Okay, it's Dorothy and Leo Ramirez. An institution, a dual institution in this particular place. This couple selflessly served their Port Hueneme community their entire lives. Leo was active with memorable events such like the Men's Follies, and he was elected to the office of mayor and city councilman, as well as being appointed chairman of the Port Hueneme Parks and Rec Commission. Dorothy and/or Leo belong to numerous community organizations, including the Port Hueneme Chamber, Navy League. Dorothy was on the board of the Friends of the Bard, Native Daughters of the Golden West, and Dorothy was given at least 3 honors by the Chamber of Commerce, but her most cherished title, I believe, I may be wrong, was the State of California bestowing upon her the Woman of the Year for 1998. Dorothy, tell us about your mom and dad.
Hello.
You probably would like to use this.
And good afternoon.
Put it up.
I am very pleased to be here. I am Elizabeth Babchuk, but some of my friends who I've known for a long, long time in Port Hueneme still call me by my old nickname, Betty, and that's the nickname my mother gave me. My parents, just like she said, were Dorothy and Leo Ramirez, who were longtime residents of this community. In fact, I believe, like my husband said, they were pioneers. They were pioneers in the endeavors to make this area grow. Well, my mother Dorothy, for those of you who remember her, she was Hueneme's biggest fan. She simply loved Port Hueneme. It was hard to get her out of this city. And today, I want to tell you a recollection of stories that my mother and dad told me about what this area was like in its early years. And I'm going to begin with my mother's family. They lived in Oxnard. My mother came from a family of 5 children. Their mother was widowed. In the 5 children, my mother was the second eldest, and she and her older brother, John, were one of their mother's biggest helpers. My mother tells the story that in the summertime, they would get on a trolley, and they would come from Oxnard to Port Hueneme, here near the Navy base, where the entrance is. And at the bottom of the entrance of the Navy base, under the eucalyptus trees, there were many, many mushrooms to pick. And so they would dig in the leaves, put the mushrooms in the basket, and would carry on. She also tells me, or told me, that the eucalyptus trees in those days, there were 2 complete rows. 2 complete rows. And that they were beautiful. They were shady. And at the top, they went together like a hollow, like this. And so after they picked the mushrooms, they would come for their treat. And they would come up to the wharf. And at the wharf, they would see many people in those days. There would be ladies with hats and parasols in their Sunday best, strolling along the wharf, just like you and I go to the mall today and stroll. Here they would get their treat of lemonade and popcorn, and then they would go back home. Let's shift now to years later. Now my mother is a young lady, and she loved to dance. And she and her older brother would go to a dance hall in Ventura. It's no longer there. It was where the fairgrounds are today, and across from the freeway, which was not there in those days, there was this green mill. And it brought in some of the big bands of that era. So my Uncle John would chaperone my mother to these dances. Well, it just so happened that one time, my dad was there with a pal. And on the dance floor, he saw this little woman. She was about 4'9". She was out there dancing with a broken leg, and she had one crutch under her arm. She was having a great time. My dad was very amused and kind of liked her. Okay, so he asked around, and then of course you know what happened. A year later they were married. They were living in Oxnard, and my father got employment with Judge Blackstock. And Judge Blackstock at that time had an estate. It was on Gonzales Road. It was quite near where St. John's Hospital is today. And one day, Judge Blackstock came out to my dad and he said, "Hey Leo, they're going to have a ceremony in Port Hueneme. It's going to be the first shovelful of soil they take from that land, and from that will be beginning of the harbor, the Port Hueneme Harbor." So my mother and father went, and of course they were just faces in a crowd of people. They were faces in a crowd of people, and little did they know or even think of that years later my dad would be elected for 28 years a harbor commissioner. And in that time, little did they know either that my mother would be gain the coveted Woman of the Year award in California. I remember going with my auntie and mother to that award in Sacramento. And we saw the state capitol, and it was very exciting. I forgot to tell you, and so I'm going to go back a little. The reason my mother had that broken leg is that she had been a softball player in those days. They had softball teams, women's lib, women's softball teams, and she was on one of them, and she was running to second base. She skid and broke her leg. That was the reason for the crutch. Well, years later then, after that ceremony, they moved to Port Hueneme. And here's where it really all begins. They moved to Santa Rosa Street, and Santa Rosa is down where the pier is. And my dad had bought 2 little houses there, and that's where we lived for many years. At this time, it was the Second World War, and Port Hueneme was booming. I can remember seeing sailors on every street corner. There were sailors in their whites and the little cute caps. There were sailors in their navy. And I could also see them out on this street, Ventura Road, going like this, trying to get a ride in a car to Port Hueneme or to Oxnard or Ventura. But at that time, there was also a bus line that came every hour. So you could pay your fare and get on the bus and go to Oxnard. I was telling you that as a child, to me, Port Hueneme seemed very, very prosperous. Okay, so what was it like then in those days? Well, down by where the historical museum is today, and you all know where that is, there was a street, which on both sides of the street were commercial buildings. And then there was a side street, which I'll tell you later, had on it. Well, the two streets in front of the historical museum, there was the Del Mar restaurant. The Del Mar restaurant was known for great pies. There was a small 5 and dime, which my mother used to go and buy materials. There was a hardware store. I can remember going in and seeing beautiful gifts on one side, like for Mother's Day. There was a drugstore with a fountain and a counter. And I used to love to go to Miller's candy store for goodies. There was a cleaners and that old white wooden hotel that some of you have read about. There was a gas station, and there was Johnny Adamson's barber shop. But to the dismay of many people in the community, there was also on that side street card rooms, saloons, and pool rooms. So at that time, there was a friend of ours, Al Gelati, who ran for sheriff. And Al ran on the platform that he was going to clean up and eliminate all the saloons, the card rooms, and the game rooms. Al Gelati ran and he won. And yes, he did eliminate all of those. Well, there was also a post office and 4 grocery stores.
4.
There was Beerworth. It was down by the ocean. There was Bert Dahl's. That was right down the street here. All of these were mom and pop stores. There was Helen Brant's family store and the Arostagy Market. And it was in front of the historical museum. And then there was my mother and dad's family pop store. That was a market, and it was on Ventura and Scott Street. There were 2 large lemon packing plants. They were down at the end of Ventura Road on the ocean front there. And it employed women because all the men had gone to war. So the lemons were brought in and they were washed and then they were dried, and each lemon was folded in tissue paper and boxed. From there they were taken on a railroad that went right there along the ocean to other parts and cities. Well, we even had a movie theater. The movie theater was next to the Hueneme School. It was built out of a very, very large Quonset hut. And as you walked into the movie theater, you thought you were in a regular movie theater that we see today. There was no difference. It was grand. And we had a library, not like this one. What I remember was a little one-room library that was probably not much bigger than your living rooms. And then, of course, there was the Port Hueneme Elementary School. Right over here, it looks today just like it did then. No difference. I went to that school for 9 years. In fact, I went to that school for 9 years and 1 day. Because my mother didn't know she made a mistake and she took me a day early. And when I got there, the teacher's name was Miss McIntyre, and she said, "Oh, just leave her. She's here now. She can help me all day long." And so I went 9 years and 1 day. I loved that school. And today, I'd like to sing for you, but instead I'll say it. The song of our school.
Okay.
Which one are you going to sing?
Of all the memories.
Oh, okay.
Of all the memories I've had about my childhood days, the best of all that I'll recall will be Hueneme days. The games we played, the friends we made, and the classrooms where we met. And Port Hueneme by the sea, I never shall forget.
To Helen. I'll tell you a little bit about Helen. Helen was born in Port Hueneme, so I think she's the longest living resident, 90 plus years, okay? She holds the record, and it all started with the help me, Arostagy store, and I hope that you will tell us a little bit about your mom, because she was really, really special. But before you get to that, I just want you to understand that when Helen grew up here, there was no television.
There was nothing.
There's no computers. There's no any of that stuff. You had to do a lot of your own entertainment, didn't you? And you might have had radio. Did your family have a telephone? Oh yeah, you had a telephone.
Yeah, we had
A lot of families didn't even have those. So.
And we had running water.
And indoor plumbing. Okay, with this I give you Helen. Helen is an institution here as well, and she was very, very good friends with your
Dorothy, of course. I'm Helen Brant. I was born in 25, so I've been here a long, long time. And I could add another story. I'm sorry, Beth. I could add.
Use your microphone, please, Helen.
Okay, I didn't want to because okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I could add more stories to Betty's stories, which would keep us here all day, so I won't do that. Anyway, I went to school here at Hueneme for 8 years. I didn't have to go to kindergarten. I think my mother was instrumental in getting the kindergarten started, doing whatever it is, census or whatever. At any rate, and we had a graduation class of 25. The same area now, I counted up, I think there's 7 grammar schools. I was trying to think of all. And you know, the part that's interesting is I knew Blackstock, Larson was my next door neighbor, Haycox was a very good friend, at Hueneme, Pearson,
Bard.
Williams, I knew Freddie Williams.
And Bard.
And I knew, everybody knew the Bards. At any rate, went to school here, went to school in Oxnard. Oxnard, at that time, the high schools, Ventura had a high school, Oxnard had one, and Santa Paula had one. It took in all of Camarillo, Westlake, Somas, all the beaches. We graduated, I think, right, Isabel, where are you? How many did we graduate, Isabel? Isabel McCarthy, who is Betty's auntie, and I went to high school together. I always brag about it. We've been friends for over 77 years. How many did we graduate, Izzy? How many did we graduate from Oxnard? Do you remember?
Well, of course, during the war, you know, a lot of the boys had gone to service. I think it's 116.
Well, it was probably a couple hundred, 250, something like that.
She said 116.
She's behind me. At any rate, I did not go to college. My parents owned a little grocery store that's across the corner from the Historical Museum. Went to work there, watched the Navy come in, was there when they did the first shovelful for the harbor. What else was it? Everything. I can remember, there used to be many years ago a dance hall out at the beach, right where Ventura
Yes.
Road cuts in.
Yeah.
That burned down somewhere along the way. I've been a beach bum my whole life. I have the skin to prove it. I still, on my birthday, we go to the beach and have Kentucky Fried Chicken. And when the grease drips down off your elbows, it's time to go home.
Okay.
At any rate, We lived at the corner of Pearl and Pacific, which is within the harbor now. There were salt flats. Right across from us, there was agriculture. Sugar beets are one thing, and wheat or hay or something that they did for the horses. Beyond that were the salt flats. The salt flats extended clear out to Silver Strand. That was the playground for everyone. Am I getting through? Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
you're
Okay.
doing fine. Yeah.
We went out, flew kites. We did all kinds of stuff out there. It was really fun, but always the beach. What else do I have?
How did you meet
Tell me
Bob?
about-
Oh, my
Tell me about
parents.
taking Bud across to the beach over there, across the river.
For some reason, we decided at one point that the beaches at Silver Strand were better than ours. That consisted of walking across. Now, I had a 3-year-old brother I was responsible for. Walking across the salt flats, going up the sand dunes. There was an irrigation ditch that went all the way down. It was brackish water, open to the ocean, so it was high tide. It was high to go. We had to go across it to get out to the beach. My brother, of course, was always with us. If the tide was low, we just waded across. If the tide was high, the water was high. So I put him on my shoulders
Oh my gosh.
and walk across, and sometimes it was, I don't tell you where it was. That's the way we got back and forth to the beach. It didn't last long, it was too much work.
How did you meet Bob?
Well, wait, my parents, here, let me tell you, just real quick, kind of interesting, I think. My father came over here from France. My father was a Basque, born in the Pyrenees. He came over here when Sherry got this all up for me, folks, so.
Oh, sure.
He came over when he was very young. He worked with Pancho Jauregui, herding sheep out in Wheeler Canyon. When the First World War started, he joined the American Army, went back to France with the, I think they called it the Sunshine Division or something like that, went and got gassed, went back, his commanding officer sent him to, down to Bordeaux for recuperation, and that's where he met my mother. So then he comes back again, of course, with the troops, and she followed him. So she ended up over here. She leaves, like all of them did, of course, her family and her country, and she comes over here. I still have the suitcase. It was like that, and that, and about, and that's what she came over here with. So anyway, they got married in Oxnard. They got married in Oxnard and settled down over here, and he worked out at the Broom Ranch, he worked at the Pettit Ranch, and then got the store. And then my father died. He never was well from all the gas. My father died when I was about 9, and from the time I was about 12, I was always the housekeeper and everything. Whatever, that's not interesting. You don't want to listen to me because all I knew how to cook was eggs. So we would have eggs and pork and beans, eggs and something canned. Eggs and pork and beans one night, eggs and string beans the next night. You get the gist. Well, Bob and I, in those days, Izzy and myself and a few others that were the last two, went to USO dances. We went 4 or 5 nights a week, for sure. And coming back on the bus one night with my pals, we meet these 2 sailors sitting in front of Nina and I. And one of them was blonde, one wasn't. Nina was fair, I wasn't. And so we made dates. Well, that guy went with Nina. But apparently he liked, should I say it? He liked my teeth.
Wow.
To his dying day, and all my kids can vouch for it, he was obsessed with people's teeth. Anyway, we dated, He went overseas twice, you know, back and forth. And we got married in Oxnard and raised a big family here. One of them is right there.
Hey,
You could
John.
probably add 13 more stories to every story. And so I've seen this city. When I grew up, it was like 4 blocks here, 4 blocks that way, and the ocean on the end. There was nothing here. But like Betty said, we had a lot of business. We had, well,
Right.
as she already said, the grocery stores. What was fun in those days, if our store ran out of potatoes, not likely, but that's for instance, we would just go to their market or to Beer Words, go to another market, borrow the potatoes, they give us the potatoes. and all the stores did that. We just swapped back and forth whatever anyone needed. It was just a small town. Everybody.
Can you picture Vaughn's and Ralph's doing that? No.
We didn't quite, you know, it was just nothing.
The
And if they
Hueneme
didn't
Spirit.
have it, we'd go into the fruit market on 5th Street in Oxnard, and the Greeks owned that one, and they always had everything. You go in there and bum it off of them.
You had a lot of lobster too, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. Lobster. That brings up Frenchie out at the islands. Frenchie was from France. He had studied somewhat to be a priest, didn't do that, got married. His wife died in a flu epidemic or something in France, and Frenchie took to the sea. He worked on freighters. I have no idea, unless Bev does, of how Frenchie got to Anacapa, but he got to Anacapa. Frenchie's Cove is named after him. At that, when I was a kid and we were friends, he had a small cabin on one side of the island, and there's a small rising hill, depending on the wind. That's where he lived. With my husband used to say 17 cats. I don't know what 17 cats has to do with it, but a lot of cats. Periodically, he'd bum a ride back to the mainland, and he brought with him gunny sacks full of live lobster. And he would bring them into the store, because he could speak to Mom, she could speak to him, and trade them for jugs of wine. And somebody else in the town would take him to the doctor or wherever he had to go. And so that was Frenchie and his lobsters. Oh, and then we'd have this big, huge gunny sack full of lobster, and we would have lobster in the salad, lobster in the potato salad, lobster, lots of lobster. I think it was a perfect childhood. You know, we roamed anywhere. We had pals. We spent every afternoon at the beach.
Yeah. Talk about the volunteers, all the different organizations we had here in Port Hueneme at one time.
Well, the one that my family, Bob was in the original cast of the Follies for 2 or 3 years after that. At one point, we had the parade. Oh, the
Harbor Days.
Harbor Days was big. There were like, I think it would be 40,000 people would come. It was a big, big event. They started out doing the fireworks in the park over here, and Bob was instrumental in that too. He was setting them off, and the crowd got too big, so they moved the fireworks out to the beach. Well, that didn't work either, because people just absolutely destroyed the beach. There were holes big enough to put a car in, the bathrooms, and they just destroyed it. They finally had to quit. But Harbor Days itself was a huge parade with personalities, and the one where we all made the bathing suits. You see
My
the bathing
favorite
suits.
picture of you can't tell your face because you're bent over.
Oh, bent over looking through my legs, yes. You recognize that? Huh?
Yes, we have that at a place of distinction at the museum.
In one of the pictures, John, how old were you then, John? About 12?
Younger than that, I think.
There's one picture of him in the background I finally found the other day. Anyway, a bunch of us Rotarians got together and we made these old-fashioned bathing suits. That was the most fun. I guarantee if you put on one of those bathing suits, you feel like you're incognito. You can do anything you want, but you didn't feel like yourself. Other than that, and reminiscing, you know, when I come back to town now, I live in Ventura now, you know, I look around. You have to expect change, but you kind of think that it's pretty nice in the old days. Thank you.
Orvene got here after World War II.
I remember when he got here.
Okay. He married his childhood sweetheart, Georgia. She's right over here in the purple. And they're the proud parents of Gerald, Dennis, and Janice. 6 grandchildren, I'm so envious, and 9 great-grandchildren. You probably can do that same thing, right, Helen?
I have, last week, we had in our family my 20th great-grandchild.
Congratulations.
I didn't do it.
Okay, to get on with Orvene, Orvene worked for the Postal Service for 40 years. He had a stint in Vietnam as a postmaster, as I remember. And he became the Port Hueneme postmaster from 1970 to 75. He then went on to Oxnard and was there from 75 until 1986. Orvene also served his community on the Port Hueneme Planning Commission and member of all kinds of civic associations. Carpenter was elected to the Port Hueneme City Council in 1964, would retire in 1996, which I believe makes you the longest serving city councilman. Is that correct?
I don't know, John.
33 years?
Oh, you're way ahead of me.
33 years, okay. And it was a really interesting time for Orvene because he, as well as you, Jim, saw a huge growth in what happened in Port Hueneme in terms of all the different building and development and so forth. But she also had a philosophy that said, you know, what's really important is to have a good place for people to raise families. And we can see that in the corridor, the Bubbling Springs corridor, as well as a number of parks. So I give you Orvene. I don't know what he's going to say today, but it'll be great. It'll be interesting. Go on.
I really don't know what I'm going to say either. Georgia and I were raised in Arkansas. I joined the Marine Corps right out of high school in 1943. Her family moved to Port Hueneme in 43. We were raised in an area of coal mines. We were situated between 2 range of mountains along with the Arkansas River. And along about 40 to 41, the coal mines all worked out. There was no more coal. So most of the men in the area had to go different places to find work. My dad was a minister, plus we lived on a large farm that he inherited most of it from his dad. And we stayed put. Her dad was a coal miner. And the coal miners' union and the longshoremen's union was the same union. So word got back to Arkansas that they were hiring in Port Hueneme, which nobody knew where it was located. And I would guess, I'm not sure, but there was probably at least 500 families moved from the area where we were raised to Ventura County in the early part of the war. There's one street up here just off of Clara Street, where 3rd Street hits Clara. There was the Miranda home. And there was a coal mine back home called the Eureka. And a couple of guys lived in a trailer there. A, B, and C Street was not all developed. A lot of vacant land in there. The government put in government trailers. People moved in. So he knew one of his buddies was coming to Port Hueneme. He went out on Clara Street and tacked up a sign, put Eureka and an arrow pointing. Now that sign later was replaced with a wooden sign. When we incorporated, that street got named Eureka. It's still there today.
Wow.
Georgia finished school here in 44 with her aunt. a couple of other women.
Isabel and I
Isabel.
graduated together.
What year did you finish?
42.
42. She's older than me. I finished in 43. So. No, I'm a year older than you. I was slow. But my first trip here was in 1943. I was stationed in San Diego, and several people here I knew. I had 10 days leave, but I knew I could see more people in Port Hueneme than I knew than if I went home out on the farm. And Georgia was here. She said I didn't come to see her. There was another girl that I had dated. That other girl and I and a friend went over to visit Georgia. So while I was overseas, I thought Georgia had got married. I came home and I asked Mother if there was any kids here that I went to school with. And she said, the little Marvel girl lives down the street. I said, yeah, but she got married. No, I don't know what happened. She didn't get married. So I went to see Georgia. That's, 72 years ago. But there's a lot of change in Port Hueneme. They mentioned the theater. Bob Priest and I ran that theater for quite some time. We both worked in the post office. I was a window clerk. We didn't have city delivery. Everybody in town had to come to the post office to get their mail, so I knew everybody in town. Actually, my brother and I went to work right out of the service. He got out about the same time I did, and went to work on the docks. Well, they seemed like it rained every day. We were loading asphalt, 50-gallon barrels. They were standing up. So you had a hook, and you turned the barrel over, and they loaded it with hooks. With the rain, there was about probably a quart of water on top of these barrels, and if you didn't step aside when you turned the barrel over, you get wet. Well, the old book members, they called them, union members, complained and voted that they wanted hazardous pay for that water. Well, to us GIs, there's 200 or 300 of us working there. Hazardous pay was when somebody was shooting at you. So we voted against it. They threw out the vote and just let the union members vote. So they voted to go on strike. Well, we had nothing to do, and my brother and I went to the post office to get our mail. There wasn't enough boxes to rent to everybody. So there was 3 and 4 and 5 families got their mail in one box. We got our mail in George's family's box. Mr. Haycox came through the lobby. I thought he was a very gruff old man. He raised his voice at us, and my brother was talking to the cute girls at the window. I thought he was going to throw us out because he was delaying the help. But he said, what are you doing? We said, nothing. You want to go to work? We didn't get out of the building. We went to work right then. So I told him I wanted to go to school and I'd work until I could find a better schedule. And out of about 15 or 20 that he hired, Bill Miranda was one, Paulie Wanda was one. I don't know, I could name a bunch of them if I could think. But anyway, I was the only one that stayed. And 40 years later, I retired. But, well, I was called back in the Korean War. It wasn't Vietnam, it was the Korean War.
Sorry.
And as I mentioned, Bob Priest and I ran the theater for John Priegel. John was one of the first city councilmen. And a story that I thought Helen might tell. Mr. Prescott lived on the corner of 3rd and Scott Street, next door to the Women's Improvement Club, which is now home. And he told me the story, and of course John looked it up in the newspaper, and probably John could tell it better than I can. But the Bank of Hueneme was robbed during the Depression years. And the whole town stood by and watched it. Really a lot of entertainment. A guy came to town and talked to the bank president, and he made agreement with him that they'd shoot a movie here, and it was to rob a bank. Of course, during the 30s, there was a lot of bank robbery. And they came in practice, and they brought their own money. They had tons of counterfeit money. And they used some of the people. You know, my grandkids worked in the movies, so I know what it is to go to a set, and they hire people in the audience to get involved. And they worked for a couple of days practicing this bank robbery. Well, they'd run out of the bank with the money, then they'd yell cut, and they'd have to do it over and over. So after a while, the third day they come to practice and said they was going to wind it up, they forgot to bring their money. And they had the confidence of the bank. They were all nice people. So the bank used real money and piled it up on the counter for this particular scene. And of course, they ran out of the bank and jumped in their car, and they didn't yell cut that day. So it was a great story, but of course the bank lost their money. But I can't imagine someone practicing 2 or 3 days to rob a bank. Back where George and I lived, there was a bank robbery during the Depression, and they didn't practice then. They shoved the bank president out the door first when they were leaving. Police was set up outside waiting for him to leave. The bank president was the guy that got shot, and then the bank robbers got away. So there was more bank robberies like that than there was the one in Hueneme. They had a lot of patience. Betty was talking about Gelati. He was a hired lieutenant from the police department, from the sheriff's department, when we hired him in Port Hueneme as our police officer. He wasn't called the chief in the beginning. But he did clean up things. You didn't mention the prostitutes, but
I noticed that too. The prostitutes.
Oh, I didn't know about that. I was a little kid then.
and you mentioned the hotel. Like you said, I was elected in '62, and the city council was also the redevelopment people. And we didn't own the hotel. We were buying a lot of buildings, bought Helen's store. And the redevelopment director made a contract to tear down the top deck and Silver Dollar, the pool hall, and where the other people hung out. And the guy that got the contract came into town on Main Street, on Hueneme Road, and made the contract, and then, like 20 or 30 days later, he was scheduled to tear it down. Well, when he came in that day, it was so foggy you couldn't see anything, and he stopped at the Standard Station on the corner of Hueneme Road and Ventura Road and asked directions to the hotel. Now, when he made the contract, the hotel was on his left side. The station directed him to go over to Main, which is now Surfside, and the hotel was up at the fore end. Well, when he got up there, top deck and Silver Dollar was on the wrong side of the street. So he drove his big bulldozer off of the lowboy and drove it right in the door of the hotel and demolished the hotel. We didn't own it, and he didn't have authority to tear it down. But newspaper came out that morning. Oxnard Press Carrier was printed in the morning, delivered in the afternoon. The Hueneme Hotel at 6 a.m. was a eyesore. At 6 p.m. it was a national monument. The city was very small, and I'm sure Georgia and Betty and Helen could tell us more about the city than I can, but it was very small. And there was a lot of government houses where Barb school sets. Across the ditch, there was nothing, no homes. Across the road, lemon orchards, Dr. Light, I think, had their own house out on Pleasant Valley Road. You go from here to 9th Street, and there was nothing. One farmhouse on the left, the other one over here behind Kmart. Mr. Haycox, the postmaster, came to Port Hueneme in 1924 as Grandma Bard's chauffeur. He was a good Republican, as the Bard, most of the Bard family was. And when the election was taking place in 30, I guess it was 30, that Roosevelt was elected, he switched parties and got appointed to postmaster in Port Hueneme in 1930. Mrs. Dewar was postmaster before him, and he stayed there till 1960. But he said when he was driving for Mrs. Bard, there was 2 cars on this side of town. Friedrich's Ranch, that's the one that's behind Kmart. They had a driveway, it was about 1,000 feet long, and it was dirt road. A large hedge on each side of it. He said always when he was going out Ventura Road, he could tell if Friedrich's driver was coming out or not because of the dust. Well, they'd watered the driveway, and Mr. Haycox didn't see him, and 2 cars that they ran together at that intersection. So that shows how crowded we've got today. The trees that she mentioned was definitely an archway. It was hard to drive down it during a windy day. But when we widened Ventura Road, one row of the trees had to come out. We also widened Ventura Road from Pleasant Valley Road out. We chopped off 1 classroom there on the grade school. It was a kindergarten room. And then they've a lot of building going on. When we built the City Hall, I was up for re-election. I walked the city twice, ever registered voter. I hope no one's here at the time. But I got chewed out so many times because we were building a new City Hall. We didn't need it, they said. Of course, the city was scattered in 3 buildings. That was the old drugstore on Hueneme Road, the museum, another road, another building somewhere. But we built the City Hall, and when we dedicated that City Hall, some of the people that really blasted me for doing it was down there helping serve refreshments and saying, look at our new City Halls. This building here, Ray Pruder was a great guy, served with him.
Jim's going to be handling a lot of these buildings, so.
When this building was built, Dick Velthon was our city manager. He was responsible with the architect for all of this natural light in here. Back then we only, from 62 until I got off in 96, or 94, I got off as mayor. We only had 3 mayors. Ray served 12 years, Dole Wright 16, and I served 4. And now they change every year with Sharpie and Murray. They started changing every year. But I guess I've talked long enough, I better sit down.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Jim wants to talk about some of the buildings, so I was just letting you know that. Jim has had a phenomenal military career. It spanned 26 years, 3 wars. So World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And following the Navy career, he earned his GED and was employed by the Port Hueneme School District. He ultimately retired as the head of maintenance. He was elected to the City Council in 1986, where he served for 8 years, and 2 of them was Mayor Pro Tem. In 2008, he received the designation of Honorary Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. Jim's been incredibly active in our community on all kinds of different boards, particularly the Chamber of Commerce and Friends of the Bar, Navy League, and Rotary. And I think he's going to be telling us about the buildings that were built during his tenure. And here's your microphone.
Well, I'm going to start way back and let's get this up here so it pulls me down. Well, I came from West Virginia and I went into the Navy and wound up in the Seabees back in Camp Perry, Virginia. The base was just being built, no roads, no sidewalks, and there was 1,300 and some of us, including officers and men. And what training we had, we could get out. The sun was shining. We had, I'd say, no more than 7 days out of the time we were there marching. Then we went into building for the bad weather, and they taught us how to fight with machetes, wooden ones. Then they busted the outfit down into 3 CBMU units, and 3 of us, we all came out here and went overseas. Well, I reported back here in '46, and they needed bus drivers for hauling a lot of the people morning and up till 10 o'clock at night. The way the military was stationed on this base. And my wife, to be, got on the bus one night. She had to get a pass signed to go to San Diego. And 3 nights later, I met her at a restaurant where it was all having dinner. And then things just went on from there. And got married May the 24th. And I had a son that was born in 48, and my daughter was born on Guam in 50. And I came back here for shore duty as an instructor and got involved. I made a mistake of buying the house next door to the chief of police because he got me involved in everything in this city. And so I saw a lot of the building, upgrading to what we have now, and we still got some upgrading that's going to be taking place throughout the city. And I hope they start it real soon, because we do have a beautiful city here in Hueneme. Then I came back from Guam on instructor duty again, and into a battalion to Vietnam. And that's when my son was only 50 miles from me, and he got hit with a 2-stage rocket. And I got to spend a day with him on the hospital ship before they sent him home. Then I got hit just a few days later. But I didn't have to be moved, but I was laid up for a while. And when I got back, before we deployed again, I retired and went to work for the school district in management. So I had a lot of things that I was taking part in the chamber, in our Harbor Days committee, in our men's follies. I'd be there to wherever needed some help. And we had a lot of people that wanted to work there with them men with no clothes on. Almost.
Tell them about the follies. How did that come about?
What?
The follies. Tell them about the follies.
Well, the follies were the men's follies. It was all men. And for that week of shows, we had people from even out of state coming.
Yeah.
After this was all put into the magazines that go all over the world. We had a lot of people that came here from other states just to see the show. And the biggest part of them were teachers, principals, and so forth. But then,
They dressed up,
huh?
how did they dress?
With women's long gowns and good. And our principal at some of the schools, our assistant superintendent and our superintendent were some of the leaders of a lot of the singing and dancing. And they put on an outstanding show. But then, when I went on to city council in '86, for 8 years I served, the library came up. What we had here for a library was just enough to, I'd say, probably this part here in this corner was as big as the library. And when the city decided to have this built, and also we give them $75,000 to get the order of all new books to put in the shelf, because they were sitting empty. Half the shelves you see now, half of them was empty, and we started filling them up. Then after my wife passed away, I got involved in the library, and I worked here way over 4 years, I believe. And I hauled all the books in that was being donated, and the crew that took care of cleaning them and all, then I deliver them where they were going. A lot of them were books that we could put in the library system. And when we found one of them, we'd get it to the librarian, and she'd check with Ventura, and they would be added as part of the library. This lady put in a lot of years doing the same thing when we'd work sometimes twice a week, sometimes if we had a lot of books, things, we'd work more. But we'd work, it was about 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours, cleaning books and getting them sorted out, and we'd have big book sales out here and worked out. But this library, it was part for the Navy base also, for them to use. Their library is real small and still is. And so we got a lot of activity out of the military in this library. And, but one of the things that got to me is when we had to decide what we were going to name this library after it was finished, and it was brought to the council, and nobody was saying anything, and so I said, let's name it Ray Pruder Library. People in the audience, and for weeks I'd get phone calls at home. Why do you want to name a building after somebody's still living? I said, look what that man has done. He's got 12 years as mayor of this city, and he's been president of the California League of Cities, which involved 58 counties. And I said that we need to get somebody's name on there. And so they went along with it. Then when they rebuilt the Carpenter Center, which was just a center then, and attached it to the library, we had to get a name for it. And nobody opened up again. I said, let's name it Orvene Carpenter. I went through the same thing, calls at night at home, and I just explained to him, look at the years that he's been on the city council and the things that he's been helping get done for this city. I said, that's why I nominated him. then to top it all off, when the Culture Center was finished, and we had to get a name, I made it again. I selected Dora Wright, and everybody went along with it. But we had a lot of hassle come back on that. But my statement to them was, look what he and Ray Pruder had done for the city when they were on the city council and he was mayor all them years. And Orvene, everything was right down the line, and so we named it the after Doral. Sorry. And but I enjoyed and still enjoying my years living here in Port Hueneme. And all
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Kathy Penpraise has been a resident of Port Hueneme for 33 years. She's always been a fan of and advocate for libraries, and she's faithfully served the Friends of the Library 20 years on this board.
Wow.
She'll be sharing her memories about the library and about the Friends. Friends was founded in '86, and the library was dedicated in '89.
Well, I certainly can't claim the long and historic and distinguished connection with the city that my fellow panelists have, but I do love Port Hueneme, and I especially love the library. If I've had any contribution to the city, it has been my work for the benefit of the library. We actually moved to Port Hueneme in 1985, and while we were selling our house, we rented a condo at Surfside 4. And when we'd sold our house, we looked all around the county to see where we would have our permanent home. And we decided, why don't we stay right here? We're across the street from the wonderful Hueneme Beach. So we bought one of the condos that was being built at that time. And I have been here, as Beverly said, for 33 years. What drew us to Ventura County was my job. I got a job with the Ventura County Library. And the job was as adult services manager, which among my other duties included building the collections for all the county libraries, including Port Hueneme. And I had the distinct pleasure of selecting and purchasing the books for the adults for this opening collection for the Port Hueneme Library when it opened. And as Jim said, the city gave a very generous donation for the collection. So we were able to provide a wonderful collection when this library opened. And then after I retired in 1990, I started really working for libraries in general. I was on a number of boards, statewide and regional, trying to create public awareness of the value of public libraries and to get more funding from state and local levels. And there was another very vocal and local library supporter and advocate working at that time, and that was Murray Rosenbluth. We were both quite active in pushing for libraries. And as a matter of fact, one of the organizations that I belonged to gave him the Citizen of the Year award for his support for libraries.
You're taking all my material.
Anyway, he was and still is a wonderful advocate for our public libraries. And it was actually his wife, Adele, who recruited me to join the Friends of the Port Hueneme Library. And that was 20 years ago. Adele was a real dynamo, and she was very busy as president, revitalizing and re-energizing the Friends of the Library. This was not actually at the beginning of the Friends of the Library, and I did want to give credit to one of the real pioneers of the Friends of the Library, and that was Lamora Magdaleno. She was one of the original founders of the Friends. And she was on our board for well into her 80s. And she also was a member emerita of the board. And so we credit her. But since I joined the Friends board 20 years ago, I have been mostly either president or secretary during that time. And until we were lucky enough to persuade Beverly Kelly to become president, and she had the distinction of serving as president for 6 consecutive years. That was a long time as president. And of course, we've been very lucky to have Arlene as our president for the last 2 years. She's done a wonderful job. Altogether, we've had some wonderful people on our board who have worked very hard to support this library. A couple of the things that I was most proud of during my terms as president, one was mentioned earlier. I actually started our annual high tea, which has become a major fundraiser for the Friends of the Library, and also a social event that people look forward to. And as Arlene said, we would love to invite you all, and it will be October 21st this year. Another interesting project I thought that we did was when the library had a Neighborhoods for Learning program. This was a grant program that reached out to all the young children and their parents and caregivers in the community. And the Friends took on the challenge of raising $8,000 in matching funds for the grant. And to do that, we had a campaign for the local businesses in the community. And the City Council actually did an official proclamation urging the businesses to support our Friends group. So we did manage to raise that $8,000, and that was in addition to what we usually raise in the way of funds from our book sales, from our membership, and from events like the tea. So we were pretty proud of that effort. And then the other mission, in addition to fundraising for the Friends, is to make the public really aware of how important the library is to the city, of the really special services and programs it provides. Of course, I think one of the main things they do is the programs for the children, and encouraging the children to find the excitement and the joy in reading. And in the last several years, they've had some special programs for the teens, which are quite exciting. They interested the teens particularly with some STEAM programs. This is science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And they get the children interested in that area, in those areas. And one of the enticements for the teenage is the new 3D printer, which was, again, donated by Marie Rosenbluth. And so this has helped bring in the teenage people into the library. Of course, we have a homework center also, which is sponsored by
The Rosenbluth family.
Rosenbluth Family Foundation. And of course, we offer books and other materials and information and computer access. And if none of you have explored it, the Ventura County Library has a marvelous website where you can access much broader resources from your home. So anyway, the Friends, our mission is to raise money to support all these services. We give money for the children's programs, for the teen programs, and for books. I think Arlene mentioned for the last 2 years, we have given $11,000 each year for the book collections. But raising our funds is not easy. And as our treasurer said, last year, our fundraising efforts didn't reach our goals. So we definitely need the help of the whole community, and I think probably most of you here today are members of the Friends. If you're not, we urge you to join us, and we do have membership envelopes on the desk. But if you are members, we would also encourage you to consider raising your membership level. Make it a little bit higher this coming year. And we do have a couple of angels who give us $1,000 or more, and we'd love a few more angels if anybody qualifies for that. Another possibility that somebody mentioned was tax benefits of giving your IRA distribution money to a charitable organization, and the Friends would be happy to accept that also.
And anytime you shop on Amazon,
Oh yeah, Beverly just reminded me, yes, if you put Port Hueneme as your designated organization on Amazon Smile, then every purchase you make, the Friends would get a little bit from that. And I do that, and I think the rest of us do too. Anyway, that's something you can do. And there are also memorial donations that you could give, or donations in honor of people. And we need book donations. Jim was talking about our book sales. We actually have not been receiving very many books for our book sales. So we would really appreciate receiving more books. The last 2 years, we haven't been able to have our big annual book sale because we haven't received enough books. So all of those things are things you might think about to help our Friends. And we need your support to keep this library thriving.
thank you, Kathy. I think Kathy did a really good job of introducing Murray, except for I want to put one.
I have nothing more to say. Thank you.
Now you have plenty to say, but Murray's been in Port Hueneme for 30 years, and he served on the city council, as you probably know, for 12 years, from 1996 to 2008. He was mayor in 2000 and in 2005. And Murray's seen a number of changes under his watch, but I think he's most proud, maybe I might be wrong, but of the Homework Center. So tell us how this got started and what a wonderful thing it is.
Thank you, Beverly.
You're welcome.
Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And Kathy, thank you very much, seriously. And I want to honor the military service of you two gentlemen. I too am a veteran. I served in the Cold War as a platoon leader in Europe at a strategic Air Force base with nukes, with the mission of repelling Russian paratroopers should they want to attack that nuclear base. Well, they never came, as we know, but Vladimir Putin is still there, so we'll see. Well, 30 years, I was the new kid on the block. And I came here, reassigned here by the Procter & Gamble company to manage an expansion of the paper products plant in Oxnard on Rice Avenue, and then retired. In fact, my plan was send me to Port Hueneme and I'll retire here. Well, that worked just fine. So shortly thereafter, about 1994, I got involved as a citizen volunteer with several local projects. One was helping John Sharkey get elected. You're welcome. One was kicking off early studies on the Port Hueneme Water Agency. We get our water from that agency. At times, it's very, very high quality water. At other times, because of extended drought, the technology can't be put to full effect, and the water quality degrades some. But it's still considerably better from what I heard about the old days. The Port Hueneme Water Agency is a joint project between the city and the Channel Islands Beach Community Services District. Navy Base Ventura County, which also gets its water from our agency, is a stakeholder in the project. The second thing that happened in 1994 and 95 is that the city, under Dick Velthon's leadership, started to become a charter city, home rule. so that we were, if that initiative passed, we would have more to say about how we managed our city. So again, as a citizen volunteer, I got involved in that committee. And then in 2016, I ran for city council, and I was elected, and so was the charter passed by the city. So we are a charter city. The only reason that I got elected, or one of the major reasons I think, is that Orvene retired that year. Wait. But both Orvene and Jim said, I'm not too bad. You said you would endorse me, I think.
Yeah, we talked about it.
we talked about it, he said. And then moving forward, the Port Hueneme Water Agency was dedicated and went on stream in the year 2000. And I was mayor that year and had the pleasure of presiding at that dedication. Then, later that year, the Rosenbluth Family Homework Center was dedicated over there. You can see it. Somewhere there's a picture of my late wife Adele cutting by my side, or me by her side, cutting the ribbon, the dedication ribbon. She was an important driving force behind the center and also behind the Friends of the Library. It was basically her idea to have a place in the library that's safe, where young people could come away from gangs, get help with their homework, particularly open to everyone, but particularly for those children who might have limited help at home because of perhaps financial and or language difficulties. This love of books, love of education is definitely a path toward upward mobility. And children who develop a love of libraries and reading go on to become good citizens for the rest of their lives and involved citizens. And so this is more than just a local library center, in my opinion. It is a window into the future. As Kathy said, the late Starrett Kreisman, who was the Ventura County Library Director, nominated me and all of us to this position that Kathy talked about. So in 2003, I was the only elected official in all of California to be honored by the organization. And wait, I forgot the name of the organization. Well, you know, my age.
California Association of Library Trustees.
California Association of Library Trustees and Commissioners. And when I went to accept that, I did so on behalf of this library and on behalf of the city of Port Hueneme. I said I see it more than just a personal recognition, but a recognition of what we really have here in this room, in this building, and in the city. Another initiative, back to 2001, then Mayor Anthony Vellante, School Superintendent Robert Fraze, and myself were instrumental in the library qualifying for grants from Neighborhoods for Learning. Those grants were very important for the financial health of this library for many years, until, unfortunately, that opportunity went away. Library staff told me that the Homework Center is viable and sustainable, and the staff and volunteers at the Homework Center assisted 889 children in the past school year. There is a plan for long-term funding of the Homework Center, assuming that it remains viable and sustainable for the long term. By the long term, I mean an indefinite future time. Margaretha, my wife, and I will continue to fund it while I am alive. Harry Rosenbluth, the oldest son of Adele and I, has agreed to continue the funding responsibility after my will matures. I like that phrase. Also, a long time in the future. Thank you all for politely listening to an old timer.
Oh, yay. You guys were fantastic. Thank you so much. Arlene, I think you had something you wanted to do? Arlene's sake. Wow.
We'd like for all of you to stand together so we can do a photo, and I'm sure there's groups that want a photo. Then behind you, I have flowers that each of you will be taking home. It's a patriotic theme for the 70th anniversary. So stand up together, because I know there's photo opportunities. And Johnny, can you help me?
Stand up, way too short.
Yeah, please stand and we'll have the flowers. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
here,
Nice.
Thank you. And Kathy.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
Beverly, you're the moderator.
Oh, I get you. Oh.
Yes, come on. There you go.
Yeah, I was going to take a picture.
7, so let's just multiply it by 10. See, there's 7 of them.
Let Stephen or
70 years
Stephen, come to
for
the
the
photo
city.
70 years for the city.
So
Oh.
someone take a picture. Okay.
your camera.
Okay, here we go. Let's give them a round of applause. And Johnny, you can stand next to. Yeah, you're good. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed it and get a chance to chat, and maybe you can dig up some more stories. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. We all remember who I am. Yes.
You'll let me know.
You had 2 brothers. Just by just 2 years
I forgot to talk about this. Frank Schuler talked.
I thought you were going to tell that story.
Oh, it's not too long.
Well, it's all on video. Thank you.
live next door.
Yeah, the quarter will follow, Bob, so then we'll go in there.
So thank you for doing this.
We got it all down on video.
I don't live here
I'm glad he told my favorite story.
If you don't mind, try it. Are the hostess's children? So it's all
Thank you so much.
There's a box for your flowers. So that would happen. No, I'm actually flowers. You put your flowers in there.
Arlene, no, right, Arlene knows.